Hi everyone, and welcome to this recorded session, which is all about consulting. So this session is called Discover Consulting, and we're going to talk a little bit about consulting at PwC. My name's Becky, and I'm joined by with my colleagues Molly and Ed today, and we're going to talk to you a little bit about the different types of consulting at PwC. As I mentioned, this is a recorded session, which means you can complete it at any time, but I would imagine that most of you that are listening now are probably doing it in advance of the Give It a Go session, which is taking place afterwards. Please do take notes throughout this session, just because you might want to use those notes when you come to the Give It a Go session afterwards. But I suppose, what's this session all about? As I mentioned, we're going to give you a little bit of an introduction to consulting at PwC and the different types of consulting at PwC and how we help clients. And actually, we're going to understand how we help those clients across, I suppose, those different types of consulting. And we're going to do that by looking at a pretend client, and we're going to kind of think about it from the different types of consulting business units that we have at PwC. Then we're going to talk a little bit about our school and college leaver consulting opportunities. And then we're going to hear from some current school and college leavers. And actually, Molly and Ed, who are joining me today, are current school and college leavers. So they will be talking a little bit about their experiences later. But firstly, as mentioned, an introduction to consulting and what consulting is all about. Hopefully you might have done a little bit of research into consulting in advance of this session, but hopefully we'll clear up any myths or any confusions throughout this session. But I suppose consultants are a little bit like doctors for businesses. I suppose if you think about when you hurt yourself or something goes wrong, you will go to the doctors to try and understand what it is that's gone wrong and hopefully get a diagnosis and get something to help you feel better, whether that be medicine or perhaps some exercises to help you mend a knee or whatever it might be. In a similar way, I suppose, with a business, there are multiple ways to solve problems within businesses. And there are often more than one problem at once when you look a little bit deeper. And so clients might come to us and kind of ask us, we're trying to solve a particular problem actually, and we might help them to actually diagnose what that problem is and then think about how they can solve that problem. But there are lots of factors to take into consideration when trying to help and solve a problem. And so we've got to look at a business holistically and think about it in its entirety. But I suppose we have specialists in particular areas within consulting which offer advice on different types of problems. So as we go through this presentation today, actually there are different types of consultants who specialize in different areas who will help to, I suppose, solve those problems that our clients might have. You've heard me talk a little bit about the different types of consulting at PwC. And as you can see on the screen there are 6 different kind of, I suppose, key business units, as we call them, that sit within consulting at PwC. So 6 component parts. And they make up the different types of kind of work and the different specialisms that we can offer to clients. So just to run through those a little bit, I suppose. You've got strategy consulting, which sits in our strategy and area of the business. And I suppose strategy consultants will look and work with the likes of your CEOs and your CEOs to think about where a business is going. It will think about perhaps what market they might want to expand into and what are the challenges in the external market. And where should we go to? So our strategy consultants are thinking about that big picture for a business. Our economics consultants, who also sit in our strategy and area of the business, specialise, I suppose, in economic policy. Those guys are the ones that are specialists in econometrics and things like that, which for those of you that are studying economics might know a little bit about. But they will help kind of navigating competition and kind of commercial disputes. And kind of shaping efficient and competitive markets and thinking about macroeconomic kind of factors that are affecting the business. So that's our economic consultants. Our delivering deal value business, I suppose, is perhaps a slightly odd one to group into consulting, but they're the ones that I suppose if you think about deals and businesses acquiring other businesses, actually you need support for that and those transactions. And so we assist clients in all of those operational aspects of the transaction, rather pre and post completion. So that's our DDV part of the business, or delivering deal value. Sustainability and climate change consulting, or S&CC as it's commonly referred to, is a particular part of I suppose, consulting, which helps organisations look at the bigger picture from, I suppose, a sustainability and a climate change point of view. As you know from watching the news and different things, and I'm sure a lot of you might hold this quite close to your heart, obviously sustainability or being sustainable for the future is a really important thing, and something businesses are certainly very much kind of really looking at nowadays. And so our S&CC consultants will help our clients think about perhaps reaching net zero, or thinking about a strategy from a sustainability point of view. So that's our S&CC consulting. Our technology consulting in the middle, or if you just pop back to the next the slide before, our technology consulting is an area of the business that thinks about technology fundamentally, and I suppose again it's something that's really kind of rife in today's society. Technology is expanding on a whole other level, and we see things like AI and VR cropping into businesses, and so it's our technology consultants that might advise our clients on the different types of technology that they could expand into or think about expanding into, and it might be that they have a whole big tech transformation, and that's something that we're looking at more increasingly now within our consulting business. We've got management consulting, which I suppose if you think about the ones that I've just spoken through, a lot of it is about that advice. I think the management consultants are the ones that actually try and bring that to fruition and advise on management strategies in order to do that, and making sure that if perhaps a tech is being implemented, actually how do you do that, how do you manage the business and make sure that everyone's kind of brought into the change, and help make that transformation a reality by bringing people along on the journey and thinking about the customer and all of those different things from a management perspective. So I think at PwC we have something that's kind of called our strategy through to execution, and if you think about our strategy consultants that think about that big picture, it's then our management consultants that kind of bring it to life, if you like. So those are the 6 different key teams within consulting at PwC, and you might be wondering why there's a grey band around the edge, and that's because actually we work with lots of different clients in consulting, and those clients fall into 3 different categories, and those categories are private sector, financial services, and government and health industries. And you might think, what does that actually mean? So an example of a private sector client is if you walk down the high street, if you see a restaurant or a hotel or something of that kind of nature, that will fall into the private sector. So we often help private businesses of that nature. Financial services, I suppose, again, if you're walking down the high street, if you see a bank or a building society, those would fall into our financial services clients. And then our government and health industries, probably quite clearly, as it says on the tin, is government agencies. So we might do some work with local governments or local councils rather, or even policing organisations, and then also hospitals and places like that. So those are the 3 different broad areas that, from a client perspective, that we work on, and that means that you can do lots of different types of work. But actually, what does a day in consulting look like? And actually, a day in consulting does vary across our business units. And although it does vary, there are some key kind of tasks that our consultants will do across those business units. And I suppose some of those are what are on the screen at the moment. So things like conducting client workshops and interviews. So for example, in order for an S&CC or a sustainability and climate change consultant to understand what it is the client wants in order to solve its problems, we might conduct a workshop to understand that. Similarly, from a tech perspective, an economics perspective, and even a DDV perspective. Data analysis falls into the role a lot because we need to use data to inform our decisions and help our clients make their decisions. We do a lot of work on slides, so like the slides that you're seeing today, we do a lot on that just because a lot of it is about presenting our solutions back to a client, because we might conduct a workshop to understand exactly what the problem is from a client perspective, but actually what are we going to propose back to them? And so we often do that in slides, as you can kind of see on the screen. We might be creating project plans. We'll work closely with the client a lot of the time, often on client side. A lot of it is about building relationships with clients. One of the things, or one of the key pieces of feedback that we get from clients, is that actually the work that we do with them, it's not just about the work that we do, it's about how we make them feel and how we work as a team, as one, as opposed to PwC and the client. And then I suppose to draw out just a final one, business development work is a really crucial part of consulting life. I suppose one of the things that we have to do as a business, as a private business, we need to make sure that we are remaining relevant so that the advice that we can provide to clients is relevant and is kind of relevant in that time, in a tech perspective especially, and a sustainability perspective, making sure that our economics consultants are up to date as well. So we need to remain relevant. And also, I suppose another part of business development work is actually writing bids. So you might be thinking, well, actually, how do we get this work? How do we win that? And one of the ways that we do that is by submitting a bid to a request for proposal from a client. So a client might say to a number of different consulting firms, look, these are the problems that I have. How will you and your business help us solve this? And if we put in a good bid or good proposal, hopefully they'll choose us and we'll help them deliver that work. But those are some different kind of things that we do within consulting, that albeit we advise on different things, there are some fundamental things that consultants do consistently. So hopefully that gives you a little bit of an understanding as to kind of what consulting is all about a little bit, and what a day in the life of might look like in terms of the sorts of tasks across those different units, but also across them fundamentally. I suppose now we're going to talk a little bit about actually, so how do we help our clients? And as I mentioned at the beginning, we're going to do that by thinking about a pretend client. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about Elliott's Groceries, which is a client that we've made up for the purpose of this Discover Consulting session. But Elliott's Groceries is a well-known supermarket, and it's renowned for its fresh produce. So just to give you some kind of key facts about Elliott's Groceries, and we're going to use Elliott's Groceries kind of throughout the purpose of this session. In terms of its size, it's the fourth biggest fresh foods supermarket in the UK. It has a 12% market share. However, it is in decline because they're getting competition from budget supermarkets or competitors. In terms of expansion, actually, because of this kind of pressure, I suppose, they are thinking about expanding into a new industry. So that could be something like clothing or perhaps selling technology. From a sustainability perspective, they have told us that actually they'd like to reduce their carbon footprint by 20% in 5 years. From a logistics perspective, so actually how do they do what they do? They actually deliver through regional online stores, as well as having 435 stores across the UK. And as I said, because they do that online delivery, they do have an online presence, but they have yet to think about kind of things like alternative technologies such as apps and those sorts of things. So that's a little bit about Elliott's Groceries, and I'm sure just by hearing kind of what we've said about Elliott's Groceries, you can probably think about some similar, I suppose, competitors out there in our daily lives that are of a similar ilk, and you could probably think about their position as well. So in order to think about Elliott's in a little bit more detail, what we're going to take a look at is our pestle analysis. And some of you might be aware of the pestle analysis, some of you this might be completely new, but not to worry, we're going to go through it together. So a pestle analysis is a way of analysing a business, and a consultant might do this in advance of perhaps doing any sort of work with the client, just to really understand actually what type of position the client is in. So pestle, as you can see on the screen there, does stand for 6 different things. So those are political, economic, social, technological, environmental, and legal. So from a political perspective, it might be things like the government and tax and foreign trade policy, which might be affecting the client. It might be labour and environmental laws. It might be funding and grants available to different types of industries and businesses. So that's a political perspective, and you've got to think about the political party in power and the sorts of things that they offer to businesses. From an economic perspective, and there is a little bit of an overlap, I think, between the political and economic aspects, but we're thinking about things like economic growth and GDP, interest rates, things like inflation, wages, disposable income and cash reserves. So all of those things which, if any of you guys are doing economics A-level, you might be familiar with, but those are sorts of things that are certainly very prominent kind of in the business world. From a social perspective, you're thinking about things like population statistics, so things like growth, age and health, and perhaps the fact that we're in an aging population. All of those sorts of things play into how a business has to kind of present itself, I suppose, to its customers. Things like social attitudes and trends, so if you're thinking about things like the fact that people are more technologically reliant now, and things like people are very much caring of the fact that we need to think about future generations and become sustainable. So that's something from a social perspective. And consumer confidence is a big thing, which, given the pandemic, is probably not as high as it once was, but that's also something that plays into a business's decisions. Technological, so things like emerging technologies. So I've already mentioned things like AI and VR, which, for those of you that are not used to those acronyms, that's artificial intelligence and virtual reality. And things like cyber threats, which, because we are increasingly online, are becoming a really big problem. Technological risk and profitability because of those risks, copyright, production and supply chain. So they're all things that businesses have to consider. Environmental, I suppose, as it quite clearly says on the tin, things like climate change, sustainability, energy resources, reduction in fossil fuels and raw materials. And actually, on top of that, the legislation and regulation that perhaps the political side of things might bring in of that particular nature. So making sure that businesses adhere to that and are making sure that they're not producing perhaps more than they should be within those laws. And then legal, again, there's a little bit of an overlap between them all, as you're probably realising. Legal is all about things like consumer rights, health and safety, employment law, advertising standards, equal opportunities, and competition legislation, which competition legislation rather is actually quite a big thing, especially in the supermarket world, just because for those of you, again, that kind of do that economic side of things, will understand a little bit about how pricing competitiveness and all of that it plays quite a big part into how supermarkets operate. So I suppose, can you think of some of the factors across these 6 areas affecting Elliott's? So we're just going to go back to Elliott's and look at it again on the slide. And I'd like you to pause your screen just for 2 minutes, and I'll give you a chance to have a think about the pestle analysis in relation to Elliott's Groceries. So I'll just leave you for 2 minutes, and then we'll come back and talk a little bit about how Elliott's Groceries might be being affected by pestle. So hopefully you've spent a little bit of time thinking about how Elliott's Groceries is being affected by those different factors in the pestle analysis. So your political, economic, social, technological rather, and environmental and legal. So just to pick out a few on the slide there so that it brings it to life a little bit more in terms of Elliott's. So Brexit, of course, is a big thing at the moment, and Brexit is affecting the imports of goods that Elliott sells. So there's a reduced choice for its consumers, and some of you might actually already have felt that throughout the pandemic, especially in the height of the pandemic, on top of Brexit, but also kind of twinned with Brexit, and we're seeing a reduction in some supply of goods. And Brexit is also affecting its workforce because many of Elliott's workers come from Europe. So that, I suppose, free movement of labour is definitely affecting Elliott's there. The pandemic has meant that tax has increased. So actually there are increased costs for Elliott's. So when there are increased costs on a business, sometimes that's passed on to consumers. So they've got to weigh up whether they do that or whether they kind of I suppose, swallow those costs themselves. From an economic perspective, again, the pandemic has meant lower incomes, meaning that people are using budget competitors more than Elliott's. And if you remember when we first introduced Elliott's, actually it said that they are getting increasing pressure from competitors. So actually the pandemic has exacerbated that. Interest rates are at an all-time low because of the pandemic as well, meaning that if Elliott's wanted to expand, it would cost them less, which is actually might be an opportunity. But then you've got to think about all the other things around expanding in quite a risky time. So those are a couple of things from an economic perspective to consider, or that Elliott's might be considering. From a social perspective, people have less confidence because of the lower disposable income, meaning they are less likely to splash out on Elliott's top range. So Elliott's might have kind of their top range for those that want to spend a little bit more, and actually it might be that people aren't doing that just as much, just because the pandemic has hit people quite hard. So that's all around consumer confidence. People are much more health conscious than they used to be, so there's less expenditure on unhealthy foods. So Elliott's have got to weigh up whether they want to create perhaps a range that is a healthy range, or a diet range, or something to that nature. That's something they could consider. And also sustainability is something that consumers care more and more about. As I mentioned, it's probably something that you guys care about. I think those of the younger generation tend to kind of have that on their minds a little bit more. And so Elliott's need to remember that and remember who they're targeting from a consumer perspective. From a technological perspective, again, thinking about emerging technologies such as AI and VR, they are disrupting the high street, and things like actually people are trying on things at home. So you might have seen that some kind of clothes companies have created apps, which means you can kind of try on the clothes at home with an app that uses kind of VR to be able to do that, or actually it's augmented reality that would be able to do that. So that's really clever. And actually high street shops are more and more exploring things like that. So it might be something that Elliott's might want to consider. Robotics are being seen more and more in supermarkets to minimize costs. So if you think of kind of your own supermarket experiences and using the machines which talk at you and you scan your items, they're being seen more and more in supermarkets and other shops because it takes away that cost of people, I suppose, who are kind of scanning your food. The shipping of goods from all over the world, sorry, just jumped onto environmental, back to technological, sorry. Drones again are being seen to help with the delivery of goods. So actually you might have seen in some of the news, Amazon have started to use drones to deliver their goods, which is a really forward thinking idea. Obviously things like less traffic and less, of course, less fumes going out into the atmosphere as a result of less lorries. Onto environmental, climate change is affecting the supply of some products at Elliott's. So climate change and kind of the rise in temperature of kind of the atmosphere is affecting some goods all over the world. Actually, one of the ones that it is seriously affecting is things like coffee beans. So actually it might be that Elliott's are not seeing as much produce from that perspective. The shipping of goods from all over the world to the UK means that Elliott's has a big carbon footprint. So actually, because in the UK we get a lot imported because we don't produce everything here, that means that there's a big carbon footprint of Elliott's. And so they've got to weigh up if they want to become net zero or less kind of or more carbon neutral in 5 years' time, they need to weigh that up. Elliott's gets its energy from fossil fuels instead of being from sustainable resources, so things like water. So actually Elliott's might want to think about how they can move from using fossil fuels to things like water or air or whatever it might be. Obviously we're seeing the use of wind turbines and that sort of thing to produce energy more and more these days, and companies are looking to do that more and more as well. And then to wrap it up from a legal perspective, Brexit means there may be changes in health and safety regulation that Elliott's needs to comply with, along with employment law because of the removal of the free movement of labour. So that kind of ties into the political aspects, but I suppose there may be laws that are brought in by the government that Elliott's as a company needs to comply with to make sure that they do not get fined for that. So these are the sorts of things that we considered, and hopefully you had the chance to have a little bit of a think about those too, and a chance to kind of think about how Elliott's as a company might just be being affected by those macro environmental factors. So now what we're going to do, I'm going to hand over to Ed, who's going to talk a little bit about the fact that Elliott's Groceries wants to expand its remit and its reach. So over to you, Ed.
Yeah, cheers. So, if we're thinking about a client who wants to diversify their products and expand into another industry, then we'd bring in our strategy consultants, who might advise the client on these sort of matters. Often, clients come to us saying that, the revenue is declining, and they're looking to the strategy consultants to see, the different ways to increase that and their profits. Clients, sometimes they don't know exactly how they can do this. So the strategy consultants, they explore all the different opportunities, some of which the client might not even think of. Another challenge for strategy consultants is that they want to help remain competitive, help keep the client even remain competitive in the market. And to do this, we start to look at the different outputs and some of the different ways we can do this, such as being more technology enabled and thinking about implementing a new piece of technology to improve that customer experience. We go on to the next slide, please. And again, how can they explore Elliot wants to explore how they can meet their sustainability targets. This is all about meeting sustainability targets. So, clients are, they're increasingly coming to us about meeting their targets, some of which have been developed by the strategy consultants, and our S&CC consultants. They kind of help the client bring in those targets and see how they kind of all line up, and thinking about, the ESG reporting and how we can kind of demonstrate this to all the stakeholders, just trying to prove that, sustainability is being taken seriously, and trying to convince them like the costs kind of outweigh the benefits, or the benefits outweigh the costs. And often, this is the unique selling point for companies and, consumers. They've got the purchasing power. So, it's kind of their voices that, we want to be, listening to. If you go on to the next slide, please. So, right, it's going to be your turn now. We're going to ask you to pause the video for a minute, and I'd like you guys to write down all the positives you can think about plastic packaging. Okay, awesome. Should be back now. Now I want you to pause the video again for a minute and have a little think about the negatives of plastic packaging. Awesome. Welcome back, guys. So if we can go on to the next slide, please. So hopefully you got a few ideas down. If you haven't, if you've got some ideas that we haven't, maybe that's a good sign. So some of the things that we got is that, it helps keep the food fresher for longer. And these are all the benefits of plastic. It's cheaper to use, so, it can help drive the price down. We don't need to recollect the plastic. It can be kind of thrown away a lot easier. Plastic is lighter, so the shipping costs will be a lot lower. If you think about one plastic bottle, times that by 1 million, it's going to be a lot, the cost impact is going to be a lot greater than if we had, like, say, a plastic bottle. And, there are some alternatives to plastic, as it uses more energy to produce. Go on to the next slide, please. So now we're going to have a look at the the negatives. So, one of which is not all of it is recyclable and reusable. Not all of it is biodegradable, so we can't throw it out into some soil and expect it to biodegrade. And this, increases the landfills and puts pressure on the oceans and the environmental impact of it. Now the raw materials to make some plastics, they come from fossil fuels. That's burning excess, it's putting CO2 into the atmosphere. And the final point that we got is, the public opinion has really changed. Think about all the stuff in the media in the past couple of years or so. It's really shifted, to being more eco-friendly around the world. So looking at, all the different kind of options that we can use that's against plastic and more sustainable methods.
So PwC have analysed over 250 technologies, and they've pulled out the top 8 which have the biggest impact in the world right now. So the first one, artificial intelligence, or AI, this automates complex decision making, and it does it by mimicking human thought processes, senses, and machine learning. Augmented reality, or AR, this is where you experience the real world, but visually or by audio. So you can imagine there's technology now where you can imagine a sofa being in your living room where you haven't even bought it yet, and this is through augmented reality. Blockchain is a digital ledger that uses software algorithms to record and confirm transactions. The record of events is shared between many parties, and information once entered cannot be altered. Drones, so PwC have actually started using drones to do their audits. I'm sure you all know what a drone is, but it can be used for surveillance, for survey, for sport, cinematography, and delivery. 3D printing, so as it says there, quite self-explanatory, is printing, but it creates 3-dimensional objects, and that can be based on digital models by layering and printing successive layers of materials. Virtual reality, or VR, very commonly used in PwC, and this transports you to a new world where you, like I said earlier, you can walk around the supermarket and just wearing a headset, and you can feel like you're walking around the supermarket, mooching down the aisles. You can use special equipment to interact with the simulation, so VR is all about simulation. Robots or robotics, again, very self-explanatory, machines with enhanced sensing, control and intelligence, and that used to automate or augment or assist human activities. And Internet of Things is a network of physical objects, devices, vehicles, appliances that enable them to exchange and act on data, usually without human intervention. So Elliott's are looking to use robotics, so self-service machines. So I'm sure you've all used a self-service checkout before in a supermarket. And we'd like to know what the benefits and risks are of using this type of technology. So you can make notes in your own time on this, but we see that the benefits of this are, so it's a great way to save money on salaries. So obviously they're taking people's jobs because we're letting the self-service checkout do the job for us. So it's much quicker, much more efficient than humans. We're not having to pay humans to do it because once we've implemented the technology, then the cost is there. We can upskill some staff to look after the robots. So this might actually be better for staff. They might see promotion opportunity in the organisation. They're not having to run the tools anymore, but they can actually look at fixing the technology. And also quicker delivery time. So the customers are going to be happier. They're able to do the self-checkout themselves. There's shorter queues in store. It's a much better experience for the customer. The negatives then, we need to make sure our customers are happy to use them and comfortable using the self-service checkouts. We all know the customers can get a bit angry when they don't work or when they break, and they can be quite frustrating. If the customers aren't going to use them, then it's a huge sunk cost for Elliott's for investing in this technology. It also means that we're losing time. So it might take a long time to implement this type of technology. And in that time, Elliott's competitors, so the budget competitors that are already competing against Elliott's may implement another technology or look at other options that Elliott's hasn't looked at, and they're too busy implementing the robots that they're losing out on the customers. We might also lose a large proportion of our staff if their jobs are being taken by robots. If the robots start failing or not working, we don't have the staff there to back up, which is going to be a detriment to Elliott's Groceries. So just to pull that all together, it's important that implementing new technology is all well and good, but it needs to be appropriate for the business. It doesn't necessarily just mean that because the technology looks really exciting that it's going to be good and work for that business. So the management consultants often come in to make sure that technology, that the business is choosing the right technology for them.
So thanks, Molly. You've talked a little bit about how management consulting might tie all of this together. So that's hopefully what this slide and what I'm going to talk about now. Hopefully what I'm going to be able to do is tie all of those bits together. So of course, Ed has spoken a little bit about strategy consulting and S&CC consulting, and Molly's spoken a little bit about economics consulting and tech consulting, and how each of those 4 different teams might kind of help the client and advise on different matters. And hopefully you've had a little bit of a go at kind of thinking about how, I suppose, a consultant might think about it as well. I suppose thinking about those broader aspects that are facing the client. So management consulting kind of brings it all together. So if you think about the fact that a client might want to implement a new technology that might be really exciting, something like an app or AI, actually it's the management consultants that will help really implement that. So they'll implement the transformational change. So I suppose it's about thinking about things like how the new change works in practice, so how the technology works with employees. And Molly spoke a little bit about how actually robotics might replace employees. So actually management consultants will identify those changes and understand, well, what's going to happen to those people that are going to be displaced by the robotics. And they'll also understand a little bit about how the tech works with people. So a bit like how Molly said, you might have people that need to upskill to work closely with the robotics. Well, actually, that's fitting them into kind of the wider process as to how Elliott's as a supermarket operates on a daily basis. They'll also think about who's affected by the change. So again, coming back to that point around people losing jobs because of self-service checkouts, but also thinking about it from a customer perspective. So again, Molly touched on the fact that actually robotics might sound like a really cool thing to an employer, because it's reducing their costs from a salary perspective. But actually from a customer perspective, I certainly can count many a times on my hands when I got frustrated with a self-service checkout because it wasn't quite doing what I wanted to do. So it's a good way of kind of assessing that technology in its entirety. So thinking about who is affected by the change, not just the employees, but the outsiders of the business as well, the stakeholders. Again, talking about upskilling the staff, I suppose, to ensure that they can fix, and also things about supporting the technology. So think about things like, of course, age restriction on certain products within the supermarket. You often need someone to actually support that robotics to make sure that it works properly. It might, of course, mean that you only need one person per every maybe 10 self-service checkouts, which is still a reduction in staff, but actually they still need to upskill in order to do that, which is a good thing as a business. It's seen as morally kind of correct for them to be upskilling continually their staff. But actually, as much as you might lose jobs through self-service checkouts, it actually might mean that the supermarket, if they kind of invest in their employees, or if Elliott's did this, for example, they might actually not lay them off. They might think about how they can use them in more meaningful ways rather than just scanning the produce that customers come to buy. Also, management consultants might be instructed for particular pieces of work as well. So they might think about the customer in particular, so those who buy the products, and think about how we can make the customer journey the best it can be. So again, linking it back to the fact that customers might not enjoy the technology as much as the kind of employer and the supermarket, as in Elliott's situation, has brought in. And so actually the change consultants or the management consultants in this perspective might think about, actually, how can we do that? How can we improve that? Can we map out the customer journey and think about how we can make that better? So for example, perhaps creating an app or updating a website so that it's user friendly. I suppose if you just think about the amount of times that you've clicked onto a website and thought, I'm not going any further because it's really unfriendly, actually we might be instructed to think a little bit more deeply about how we can make that website or that app more user friendly so that we can improve that customer journey. So in essence, our management consultants are the ones that bring it all together, I suppose. They work very closely with your tech consultants, your economics consultants, your S&CC and strategy consultants on all sorts of projects to bring that to life through things like workshops and understanding exactly what it is that the client wants. So that's a little bit about management consulting, and hopefully between Molly, myself and Ed, we've spoken to you a little bit about the different teams within consulting, and hopefully it's given you a little bit of an idea as to what consulting at PwC is all about. So now we're going to talk a little bit about the opportunities that are available to school and college leavers within consulting. So we do have a school and college leaver opportunity within our management consulting business unit, and you can join straight from school. And so it is an apprenticeship, which means that you will work towards a qualification alongside working for us. But it's a 2-year higher apprentice or school and college leaver program, and actually, although it is a 2-year scheme, there is an opportunity to join the graduate scheme afterwards. So you might spend 2 years as a higher apprentice, and then you could go on to the graduate scheme, which I know Molly and Ed are soon to actually think about going on to. So there's definitely a lot of room for kind of development and continuous kind of moving up the ladder, if you will, after the higher apprenticeship. Again, because it is obviously a full-time job, you will get a full-time salary, and as I mentioned, you will get a qualification throughout that time, and that is a fully funded level 4 apprenticeship. So you'll be working through that, and Molly and Ed will talk a little bit about that in a minute. You will get real work and responsibility working with clients. So again, one thing that we do on the higher apprenticeship scheme is get you actually working on these types of projects. So we will put you in the deep end, if you like, and we'll get you onto client site in your 2nd year, and you'll get the chance to perhaps look at a client like Elliott's and think about how we can help them, and use your kind of thinking outside the box thinking to understand or kind of think about, yeah, how we can think about new technologies or think about how we can help them from a sustainability perspective. You will get excellent support throughout those 2 years and progression from what we call a career coach. So your career coach is there to help you through those 2 years and beyond, to kind of continually improve from a technical perspective, but also a soft skill perspective. And actually, we haven't mentioned it on the slide there, but as well as a career coach, you'll also get a buddy of someone kind of in the year above you, if you like. He will be there to kind of answer questions throughout. So you're fully supported, and you've got a team around you. Of course, there's no student debt, which is one of the biggest pulls towards doing this type of route against going to university. Or it might be that you just don't fancy uni and that you fancy getting straight into the world of work. And again, Ed and Molly will talk a little bit about kind of, I suppose, why they chose the higher apprenticeship scheme instead of going to university. And so on the next slide, we've just put a bit of a diagram to understand actually, so what is the Management Consulting School and College Leaver Programme? What does it look like? So year one consists of 2 6-month rotations on internal projects at PwC, and you might wonder what we mean by internal projects, but that just means you won't actually be working on a client project in your first year. You'll be working on something such as the Bid Hub or internal operations. So Bid Hub, a bit like going back to the beginning of this presentation when we spoke about how we bid for work, you might actually work with a team that are actually doing a lot of that bidding. So we bid for a lot of big projects and programs that are worth lots of money, and so you might work with the Bid Hub to help them write that bid or kind of pull CVs to put the project team together. And then in your second year, actually that's when you get the opportunity to gain experience on client projects. So as I mentioned, that's when you might end up working with a client like Elliott's to think about how you can or help them solve their important problems. But as mentioned, you will be working towards a level 4 apprenticeship throughout, and that is the Junior Management Consulting Apprenticeship, which is a combination of exams and coursework. You'll build your network throughout those 2 years and beyond. It doesn't stop after those 2 years. You can always continue to build your network within management consulting and further flung. As I mentioned, management consulting works very closely with tech, S&CC, strategy and econ, so making sure that you're building it as far and wide as possible is really crucial. And as we mentioned, it does have a full-time salary and no student debt. But as I mentioned, it is an opportunity to progress, or there is very much opportunity to progress onto the graduate management consulting after those 2 years. So there's definitely that room for development after the HAP scheme, as we commonly call it. So now we're going to hear a little bit more from Molly and Ed, who, as I mentioned, are current higher apprentices on our School and College Leaver programme. And they're going to talk a little bit about their experiences thus far on the programme, but also talk a little bit about, I suppose, how they were feeling in year 12 and 13 and why they chose this programme. So I'm going to hand over to Molly as a first port of call. So Molly, over to you to talk a little bit about your experience.
Thanks, Becky. So yeah, I joined the Higher Apprentice Programme or School and College Leaver Programme in 2019, and I came straight from sixth form. So I was in sixth form doing my A-levels, didn't really know what I wanted to do at this point. I attended the Insight Week like you guys did, and I really enjoyed consulting, and I thought I would apply for the apprenticeship. I did also apply to uni, didn't really have a subject that I was that passionate about to dedicate studying for 3 years. I knew I just wanted to get working, get earning, get like working up London. I always wanted a job up London. I wanted a job in the financial services industry. And when I got the apprenticeship, I just knew it was the right choice for me. I was a little bit worried about missing out at uni, especially the social aspect. And don't get me wrong, for the first month or so, and you see people going out midweek and, you know, you've got to get up for work in the morning. But I have to admit that there is a big social element here at PwC, and I think that's down to the people that are here. It is full of great people, and also like you're in a cohort of high apprentices, so there's 30 of us in our cohort, and some in London, some dotted all over in different regional offices, and we are really close-knit as a cohort. Most of them are my age or a couple of years above, so it's really nice, and I didn't miss the social aspect that I thought I was going to. I was also slightly nervous about studying for the full-time qualification whilst doing a full-time job. But again, nothing to worry about with the support from my career coach, the tutors and my college tutors, and there's different work streams on the scheme that help you and provide support, make it really easy. And the studying isn't too much to worry about. I did economics at A-level. You don't need any specific A-level requirements subject-wise. So there's nothing to worry about if you're not doing economics A-level, but it does really help. And the coursework was fine, the exams were fine, and now, yeah, really looking forward to going to the graduate scheme.
Thanks very much, Molly, for talking through your experiences, and hopefully it's really good for those of you that are still listening to this recorded session to hear that actually I'm sure it's something that you're probably thinking about and weighing up at the moment, kind of the university versus school and college leaver programs. And I think a big thing that you weigh up is that social element of uni, which we all kind of look forward to throughout, I think, secondary school. So really good to hear that actually at PwC you do get kind of an equivalent of that. You get a cohort that becomes, I suppose, your uni mates. So now I'm going to hand over to Ed, who's going to talk a little bit about his experiences as well. So over to you, Ed.
Yeah, cheers. So it's quite a little bit different, my little route to like what Molly's done. So, during sixth form, I was convinced university all the way, it's kind of the only option. And I think school kind of like pushed that, and that was that's what I had my eyes on. So I went to university for like a couple of months, doing economics, and kind of realized after a couple of months that the course wasn't really for me. Social side, yeah, it was good, but for doing the economics for like another kind of 2.5 years, kind of what Molly said, you got to think about what you're passionate about, and I wasn't really passionate about economics to kind of continue it for like another 2.5 years or so. So kind of how did I find the PwC? So I walked into a lecture theatre one day, and I sat down next to these two guys who I was quite familiar with, and one day they had all this kind of orange gear, so like orange pencil cases, orange pens, orange rubbers. And I asked them, where'd you get all this orange stuff from? And they said to me that they were on like the PwC kind of degree program. I kind of turned to them and I was like, PW who? I wasn't really sure who they were or what they kind of did. So I went away and I did a bit of research about kind of who they were, and like they're part of the Big Four. There's like account, audit, tax. There's so many different lines of service. So I was like, oh, that's pretty interesting. So when I finally kind of left, like 3 months down the line, I picked up and I found this kind of consulting school leaver scheme. I'm thinking, oh, this is perfect. This kind of matches up to what I want to get out of my career. So signed up, and here we are today. And people say about missing out on that university life and whatnot, but in all honesty, I don't think you're missing out on much. Maybe the first couple of months, but afterwards, it really does die down. And as Molly said, within the whole kind of PAP scheme here, there's like a whole cohort of us up and down the country, and there's we have like development days, we have all sorts of days for training, and that gives us the opportunity to network and meet others as well. And there's always other people around the office, to talk with load, and across different grades as well. So you really do get that kind of network and that experience.
Thanks so much, Ed. And again, really good to hear about kind of the social aspect of the HAP scheme, and the fact that you do things like development days and days at college together, which does mean that you do build those relationships with them. And I suppose just to ask a quite quick question of you, Ed, I suppose in terms of your second year and the client work that you've done, how's that been, and what type of work have you been doing?
Oh yeah, good question. So I mean, I think one of the benefits of the scheme is like sort of the responsibility you're kind of given, and you really are putting, like, you're given the opportunity to go into client meetings face to face with some of the clients, some of which are like part of the C-suite, so chief finance officer, etc. And being able to sit at like the kind of table and listen to the kind of discussions that these guys are having. I look back at my uni friends who are still kind of, well, they're just finishing, and thinking like, oh wow, I've really got that step up on them, and that kind of experience. But yeah, the second year, it's a gradual kind of lean up. So as you start, it kind of snowballs a bit, in terms of responsibilities and whatnot, and you kind of ease into it. So come second year, yeah, you do get opportunities to work on some really big client names, and yeah, that really improves that kind of your skill set that touchwood take on to the the graduate scheme come autumn.
Thanks, Ed, and that's a really good point around kind of the gradual workup of kind of your responsibility. I think one of the words I said earlier was the fact that we put you in the deep end, which I think is a good thing, and we do that to a certain perspective, because I think there's an element of learning by just kind of plonking you in and getting you to give you a go. But actually, you can take it at your own pace, and certainly by the time that you get to that kind of client work in your second year, you'll have really kind of felt embedded at PwC, and you'll get the chance to kind of increase that responsibility as much as you want as well. So I'm sure Ed and Molly have kind of if they felt comfortable, put their hand up and said, you know what, I can do a little bit more, and that's something that at PwC we're happy for you to do. So hopefully that gives you a little bit of an idea and an insight into kind of life as a hire apprentice at PwC. And as Ed and Molly mentioned, they will be going on to the graduate scheme hopefully in autumn, which is a fantastic opportunity, as we've mentioned. And one of the things that actually I failed to mention at the beginning, but actually I am an example of Ed and Molly, but just about 3 years in advance of them. So I have done the graduate scheme, and I am now kind of on the other side of that. So I think that just really puts into practice that you can start at 18 straight after your A-levels on the higher apprenticeship scheme, work yourself up onto the grad scheme, and then kind of promote, as we say, into a particular part of management consulting, and you can have a very extended long career at PwC, and there are certainly no holdbacks. I've not felt any different and have not been treated any differently to my graduate peers. So just wanted to put that out there and let you know that there's no kind of holdbacks by not having that degree, which I think again people kind of weigh up when they're thinking about which route to take. So we're going to finish there, because I'm conscious that we've been speaking at you for a little bit, and you're going to have a go at the Give It a Go session very, very soon. But thank you all very much for listening, and hopefully for staying with us until the end. But we look forward to seeing you in a couple of minutes at the Give It a Go session, and you will be joined again by myself, Molly and Ed. So we'll speak to you soon.